Hi, welcome back to Joe Blogs. If you've been following the channel, you'll know that I recently posted a video talking about the threat of military action in the Middle East as a result of the fact that Iran has been enriching its uranium with a view to trying to make an atomic bomb. And the biggest opponent to this is Israel, because Israel and Iran have fundamental differences going back to the 1950s. And on Friday, the 13th of June, if you're superstitious, obviously Friday the 13th is a date that you try to avoid because bad things can happen. And unfortunately, bad things have happened in Iran because Israel decided to launch military action, and it's deployed its fighter jets and sent lots of missiles and trying to attack the facilities in Iran and also launched attacks in Tehran, the capital. And if we have a look at this chart, you can see what the impact of that has been on global oil prices. They have spiked. In the previous video, I talked about the fact that oil prices had risen by 5%. But on the 13th of June, oil prices at one point were up by 13% in one day, making it the biggest single movement for more than 3 years. And in addition to what's going on with oil prices, global markets are down. And all of this is as a result of the fact that there is now a risk that this incident could lead to a full-on war between Israel and Iran. And there's always a potential that other nations could get drawn in. I recently reported on the fact that Donald Trump had ordered the removal of non-essential military personnel from some of the Middle East camps. And if Iran decides to attack some of the US bases, then obviously the US would be in a situation where it'd have to decide whether or not it's going to take retaliatory action. So before I get into the details, let's hear from the Israeli Prime Minister.
Moments ago, Israel launched Operation Rising Lion, a targeted military operation to roll back the Iranian threat to Israel's very survival. This operation will continue for as many days as it takes to remove this threat. For decades, the tyrants of Tehran have brazenly, openly called for Israel's destruction. They've backed up their genocidal rhetoric with a program to develop nuclear weapons. In recent years, Iran has produced enough highly enriched uranium for 9 atom bombs. 9. In recent months, Iran has taken steps that it has never taken before, steps to weaponize this enriched uranium. And if not stopped, Iran could produce a nuclear weapon in a very short time. It could be a year, it could be within a few months, less than a year. This is a clear and present danger to Israel's very survival.
So in the previous video, we talked about the enrichment process because natural uranium only has around 0.7% of the isotope that's needed to make an atom bomb. So in order to make the atom bomb, you need to enrich it, increase the percentage of that isotope. And as you heard there, you need to get to around 90% to be basically an effective bomb. And in today's video, I wanted to talk about the steps required to weaponize that uranium, because once you get to 90%, that doesn't make it a bomb. You then have to create the bomb, which is going to then release all of that uranium. So this chart really shows us the breakdown of the steps needed to weaponize uranium, to turn it into a genuine atom bomb. And I thought it was worth having a look at how long it would take once you've got the uranium up to 90%. And I recently reported that they were at 60%. That's what the global markets are reporting. But I did get a lot of messages from people yesterday after I posted that video saying that they had military intel that was saying that Iran was up to 80% on some of that uranium. So it's getting very close, reportedly, to that 90% level. So at the point where the uranium could then be used to create a bomb. So in terms of that further enrichment, getting up to 90% is the first step. And from where they are at the moment, 60%, and that's over 400 kilograms of uranium is at 60%, it's estimated it would only take a couple of weeks to actually get that to 90%. So in terms of the difficulty, Iran has the capability of doing that. I showed you a photo yesterday of the centrifuges. You might be wondering why Israel don't just bomb those centrifuges. Well, we'll go on to talk about that in a moment because it's not quite as easy as that. Once you've got it to 90%, you then need to go through the metal conversion process where you're converting uranium hexafluoride gas into metallic uranium, which is UF6 into metallic uranium. That's potentially going to take another couple of weeks. And the difficulty, well, that's a bit more difficult. Apparently, Iran has been experimenting with that end of the process, but hasn't perfected it yet. Certainly not, nobody's aware that they have. Once you've got to that stage where you've turned the uranium into metal, then you need to form the bomb core. So you need to shape the uranium metal into a precise sphere, which is the bomb pit. And that's going to take a couple of months, probably. And in terms of how difficult that is to do, well, this is where we're getting into the more difficult end of the spectrum because it requires advanced metallurgy, and we're not aware that Iran has that capability at the moment. If you've seen the film Oppenheimer, you may well be familiar with some of this stuff, that this was a lot of the issues that the US had back in 1945 when it was trying to create the first atom bomb. Once you've done that, once you've created the core, you then need to design an explosive lens system. So conventional explosives compress the uranium to supercritical mass. It's estimated that that process would take up to 6 months. And in terms of the difficulty, it's pretty difficult. Precise engineering is required, and we're not aware that Iran has that capability yet. And then the final step is to integrate everything into the delivery system. So you've got to fit the bomb into a missile and then load that missile into an aircraft. And that is estimated to take up to 12 months because it's very difficult to achieve. It depends on the size and the sophistication of the design. And if you've seen the Oppenheimer movie, you'll know that the two atom bombs that the US created looked very different. They had very different shapes and sizes. So in terms of delivery, they had to work out how they were going to do that. So in terms of summarizing how difficult it would be for Iran to actually weaponize 90% enriched uranium, well, it has plenty of uranium, so it's got sufficient material, so it doesn't have a problem in terms of creating. You heard that Netanyahu was saying that he believes that Iran has enough for 9 nuclear bombs at the moment. In terms of enriching it to weapons grade, well, Iran can do that. We think that they can get to 90%, and as I said, some people are reporting that they're already at 80%. The metal conversion process, taking the gas into a metal, you'll need experience for that, which has not been declared. So we're not quite sure whether Iran has that capability yet. In terms of designing the weapon itself, well, nobody knows. But again, it's not impossible to do it. It's been done before. So it's within the realms of theory that they could do it. And in terms of actually creating a delivery system, well, ballistic missiles do exist, but fitting a nuclear bomb, requires advanced miniaturization. So that's probably the most challenging part from Iran's point of view in terms of having an effective nuclear weapon. So Iran's not quite there yet, but let's hear exactly what happened during the attacks that were launched by Israel.
We struck at the heart of Iran's nuclear enrichment program. We struck at the heart of Iran's nuclear weaponization program. We targeted Iran's main enrichment facility in Natanz. We targeted Iran's leading nuclear scientists working on the Iranian bomb. We also struck at the heart of Iran's ballistic missile program. Last year, Iran fired 300 ballistic missiles at Israel. Each of these missiles carries a ton of explosives and threatens the lives of hundreds of people. Soon, those missiles could carry a nuclear payload, threatening the lives not of hundreds, but of millions.
So what we're hearing here is that Iran has been targeting a lot of the people involved in this process. It's been reported that one of the leading scientists was killed, and the leader of one of the defense areas was also killed in Iran. And if we look at this map, you can see that Israel doesn't actually border Iran. It's around about 1,000 miles between the two countries. That's about 1,600 kilometers. So they're not neighbors, and launching an attack obviously is more of a challenge when you don't have weaponry on the border. The reason why they haven't attacked the facility where all of the centrifuge is going on, where they're actually enriching the uranium, which is at the Natanz facility in Iran, is because this is an underground facility. So it's located between 7 and 8 meters of reinforced concrete has been wrapped around the facility. And then that's been buried 25 meters underground. So we're talking around about 100 feet underground, and it's reinforced by this concrete. So that gives it some protection. Well, there are missiles that can actually be deployed that would go that far. We'll have a look in a moment as to whether or not Israel has access to those missiles. But it's interesting that Iran does actually have a second facility, which is actually in Fordow, which is buried inside a mountain. And that has around 100 meters of rock above it. So that's around 300 feet of pure rock. So that would be much more difficult to be able to get to with a missile. You need to have something really quite special to get through that. So that's the reason why Israel hasn't just blown up this plant. You might have been thinking, well, why don't they just attack the plant, kill all of the uranium will go up in the air, and that'll be the end of it, job done. Well, obviously, Iran have thought about that in advance, and they've buried these things underground to make them much more difficult to attack. Now, the attacks that were launched by Israel against Iran were launched by jets. So rather than sending missiles all the way from Israel, they sent jets to the border of Iran and then deployed air-launched standoff missiles. And a standoff missile is basically a smart missile which can then make its way to the target on its own. You don't have to drop it overhead like back in World War II, where the best way of deploying bombs was actually to fly over the target and then drop it, a bit like in Star Wars, where they have to go to the Death Star and drop the bomb directly down the chute. You don't have to do that anymore because these missiles can be guided themselves. And the missiles that were reportedly used in the attack were the Delilah cruise missile, which travels at a speed of Mach 0.3, which is 350 kilometers per hour, around 200 miles per hour. And in terms of how long that missile would have taken to hit the strike target in Iran, around 20 to 30 minutes from the edge of Iranian airspace. And the reason, obviously, why the jets didn't go into Iranian airspace is they would then risk being shot down by the defense systems in Iran. So much safer from the pilot's point of view to drop the missile on the edge of the border and then let the missile do its work. The Rampage missile was also used. That travels at a speed of Mach between 2 and 3. So it would have only taken between 5 and 10 minutes to get to the strike zone. And obviously, from a defense point of view, Iran does have systems to be able to take out missiles, but it's very difficult when they're traveling at that speed and you don't really know where they're coming from. And then there was also the Popeye Turbo, which is a strategic cruise missile that travels at subsonic speed and would have taken between half an hour and 40 minutes to hit the zone. Now, in terms of which ballistic missiles could strike into the Natanz facility, it's located near Kashan, which is about 100 to 200 miles south of Tehran. The missiles that could basically be used, the ones that Israel have got are called Jericho 3. They have a range of between 4,000 and 6,500 kilometers. So they've got enough range to get across that 1,500 kilometer gap between the two countries. Are they able to implement a deep strike? Well, they could do if they were equipped with bunker busting warheads, which we don't think Israel have at the moment, but the USA does have. And obviously, it would be a question as to whether or not the US would allow Israel access to those warheads. We do have other weaponry that could be used to strike that facility. The Trident II, which is a US-UK missile, which is submarine launched. That has a range of 12,000 kilometers, so double the Jericho 3. And that could be used for a deep strike. So that would take out that facility. But it's unlikely that either the US or the UK are going to want to do that at the moment, because that would obviously be a big political decision. You would be essentially launching war on Iran at that point. The Minuteman III, which is a missile that the USA has a range of 13,000 kilometers and could easily be used for the deep strike, but probably unlikely. And then we've got the Pershing II, which has been retired, but just for comparison, that could be used, but is very unlikely to be. So in terms of whether or not Israel has this capability, it doesn't quite at the moment, but if it could get some bunker busting warheads, then maybe it could. So one of the big questions is, what is the USA's position here? Is it helping Israel? Is it going to team up with Israel, or is Israel acting alone? Well, let's hear from Netanyahu again.
Our action will help make the world a much safer place. I want to thank President Trump for his leadership in confronting Iran's nuclear weapons program. He has made clear time and again that Iran cannot have a nuclear enrichment program. Today, it is clear that Iran is just buying for time. It refuses to agree to this basic requirement of peaceful nations. That is why we have no choice but to act, and act now.
So, what he's referring to there is the fact that there have been 5 meetings so far this year between the USA and Iran, trying to agree some sort of settlement so that Iran won't continue developing and enriching its uranium. But none of those meetings have actually resulted in anything tangible. They've all just been paused, and then we've gone on to the next meeting. And there was actually due to be another meeting on Sunday, the 15th of June, between the two nations. But that meeting has now been postponed because of the action of Israel. Now, the Israeli Prime Minister was saying that Israel didn't have any other choice but to launch action. But in terms of the official White House response, this has been posted on the White House website from Secretary of State Marco Rubio. And it says, "Tonight, Israel took unilateral action against Iran. We are not involved in strikes against Iran, and our top priority is protecting American forces in the region. Israel advised us that they believed this action was necessary for its self-defense. President Trump and the administration have taken all necessary steps to protect our forces and remain in close contact with our regional partners. Let me be clear, Iran should not target US interests or personnel." So what we're hearing here is a very clear message from the USA. They are saying this was nothing to do with them. It was Israel acting unilaterally, but the USA will defend itself if any US targets or personnel are targeted by Iran. So that is a very clear message. We're not involved and we don't want to be involved. Please don't involve us. But if you do, then the consequences will be thereafter. So what's the summary and conclusion today? Well, I wanted to post this video because I think the rising tension and now the military action that's taking place in Iran is one of the biggest threats to the global economy in 2025. And in terms of Iran's response so far, at the time of making this video, Iran had launched hundreds of drone attacks on Israel. We saw the map earlier in the video. There's about 1,000 miles between the two countries. So in order to actually launch some attacks, you've got to travel across other countries. So Iran has sent drones, which Israel is in the process of trying to shoot down using its defense systems. So we're starting to see a reaction, and it's likely that this conflict is going to go on for days at least, could be weeks, could be longer. What we've seen over the last 12 months is that Israel has launched a number of attacks. It firstly launched some attacks into the Gaza Strip as a result of the terrorist incident that took place back in October of 2023. And then following on from that, it then had some military interaction with Lebanon, which is where Hezbollah is based. And Hezbollah is fully supported by Iran. It's funded by Iran. So in a roundabout way, Israel was launching attacks on a force that was being supported by Iran. But what we've seen in today's video is that Israel has now launched direct attacks into Iran itself. And this is something that the world has been waiting for the past few years. Israel apparently has been building up to this. It's been planning this for a long period of time. And Friday the 13th was seen as being the right time to launch this strike action. Now, interestingly, the USA has stepped back from supporting Israel on this front. Donald Trump has been very forthright in terms of telling Iran that they cannot have a nuclear weapon. And that's the whole point of getting around the table and having these discussions. And the reason why Donald Trump pulled out of the previous agreements that Iran had signed under the Obama regime back in 2015 was because Iran was building up thousands of ballistic missiles. And he decided that actually it wasn't just about the nuclear development of bombs. They were actually building up a huge arsenal, which they could use to launch an attack on Israel. And we heard from Prime Minister Netanyahu about that earlier. He's concerned that all of those missiles could be coming to Israel at some point soon. So Donald Trump is trying to defuse the situation in the Middle East, but unfortunately, it's now sparked up. And I think the reality of these attacks that Israel have launched is that Iran will retaliate. It won't just be the drones that we're seeing so far. I'm sure there will be missile attacks. And then the question is, what will Israel do in response? Well, if we have a look at what happened in Lebanon, Israel was very aggressive. They basically have destroyed the Hezbollah army. It's no longer viewed as being an army. So I think Israel is ready for a conflict. It's ready to go in terms of stamping out the threat from Iran. But the question is, how much disruption is this going to cause? How long will this conflict go on for? And what are the implications for the global economy? And what we've seen so far is that oil prices have jumped by the most in 3 years, and global markets are down. Gold is up at a new high. So all of that tells us that the markets are very nervous, that this could really cause major problems in 2025. And let's not forget, we've already got some problems that are brewing anyway. China is struggling at the moment in terms of both its export markets because of the tariffs that have been applied against it, and also its domestic market is in free fall because they've got deflation. Prices are going down month on month and year on year. So China's struggling. The USA is likely to see problems with regards to the tariffs. Are going to increase prices, which will mean that people will have less disposable income, will spend less. And so GDP growth is likely to be lower in 2025 than previously expected. And if we now throw in another war situation on top of what's happening in Ukraine and what was already happening in the Gaza Strip in Israel, this could really cause major problems and cause markets to start coming off for the rest of 2025. And in theory, this could actually trigger a global recession. If we see a full out war here, if the two nations decide to go head to head, there are lots of other nations in between, lots of oil producing nations that are very close to these entities. And if they get drawn in, then we could see disruption to global oil production. We could see oil prices going up at a time when markets are unstable. That's going to increase prices, increase inflation, which potentially then means increases in interest rates. And we all know that if interest rates go up, that means we all have less money because borrowing's more expensive. And so all of this could represent really bad news for the global economy in 2025. So hopefully you've enjoyed today's video, you found it useful, informative, and thought-provoking. If you've liked what I've said, then please give me a thumbs up. Thank you for watching this video all the way through to the end. And thank you so much to everyone that's bought me a coffee or sent me a YouTube super thanks, or has signed up as a patron or a YouTube member or a Buy Me a Coffee member. Really, really appreciate your support. And here's something to put a smile on your face.